I'm the voice of Night Industry 2000's microprocessor, KITT for easy reference, KIT if you prefer.
So welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, not least to you, Tom Greene, writer and producer on Knight Rider. I've looked so much forward to talking to you again and continuing this conversation with all your interesting stories regarding your work on Knight Rider. So, welcome.
Well, thank you. Yes, and unfortunately, they used to say you can. There's an expression in Hollywood which is, "Oh, I have these stories and I'll dine out on them for years." And if you ever heard that expression, and it's funny because I did that years ago, and I do with this and other shows I've done. You do dine out, which means you become somewhat of a raconteur at dinner parties because you tell these stories. But hi, and just a quick notice of those, if you've been watching the other two, I guess you put those other two parts, and that was in my office. I decided, since I do live in LA and I live up in a very uh, paradise type jungle area of Los Angeles, and that's true. I'm here in my atrium, so hopefully you can see this, and it makes it more LA like. Anyway, we'll start with some. We were talking about some things before, and the one thing that when I was looking back, I don't have many scripts, but I did have one script for a reason, and when I was looking at it, I had to laugh because, and it's something you may not notice, was I may have mentioned this. We wrote these scripts in those days, which I think I've mentioned it before, with something called a typewriter. I don't know if any of you know what a typewriter is. And I think I also mentioned before, I have an assistant. She's not a youngster, and she's very, very smart, college degree, 28 years old. And we have what are called Selectric typewriters that Universal bought a whole bunch of, and we were one of the first ones to use them. And it was an electric typewriter from IBM that had a ball in the middle. And you could actually replace the ball with different fonts like you do now, but you do it with the ball. And we literally put paper in and did that. But I still had I had one at home too. I had a selector, but of course it was all packaged away in a shed in my property here. And I was asking my assistant to go out there, and she said, "Tom, you come over here. What's this?" And she opened it up, and it was this electric, and she didn't know what it was, which is a really scary thing. And she actually said, where's the screen? And because, we still have keyboards. And but I think she's not that crazy, because if I had a regular old typewriter where the keys came up like you see in all the old movies, she may have recognized that. But of course, this didn't have keys. So anyway, and the reason I'm mentioning all that is that when I was looking at this, I had to laugh because, I'll show you this. This is something that you would imagine that we had to type all the time. I'm going to write it here for you. Okay, you recognize, and hopefully you can see this. You see who that is?
Yeah, Kit.
Yep. Okay. We hated this because in a typewriter, every time you wrote Kit in action, in dialogue, in his character name, you had to get capital K, then hit period, capital I, hit period, capital T, hit period, capital T again. And I got to tell you, it drove us crazy. Now, of course, now there's 100 million ways with the computer. You just and there's Kit comes up. Yeah. But you had to do that each time. And I got to tell you, it was a pain in the ass. And it's one thing you probably will not hear from anyone else, but I had to mention that, and as a matter of fact, we even tried just KITT without the periods. And I have to tell you, this is insane that the network, we actually got a note, and I've discussed before about these crazy network executives, including the one that, thank God, we had a very progressive executives and crew when he was upset about, Kit and Michael being gay, and it was like, and we had crew members who cares? I mean, that's life, and God love everyone. We're open to every people and who they were. And but though anyway, this was the same executive, which is the reason I mentioned it. And he sent a memo and he said, you must put the periods. You can't just have KITT, and he says, we will not accept the script. And this is true. Same idiot.
That's
Um,
amazing.
so anyway, I thought it would, I
Okay.
would,
Well,
so,
speaking of Kit, Tom, Knight Rider was also an action show with a lot of stunts. Um, uh, have you any stories on the Kit cars breaking down and how you were involved with the stunts of the show?
Oh, absolutely. It's a good question. The first thing, of course, in just developing stunts, you have to have the stunt. You have to have at least one or two turbo boosts. You have to have kit. We also would invent new things that kit could do. Turbo reverse, which of course was in Knight in Shining Armor, I think, and all kinds of things. And and in one which I'll discuss, where it actually flies into the air but doesn't actually fly, which, as I told you, they wanted and we refused to do. But the first thing you'd have to do as a producer when you're writing, or, we would take scripts that others would write, freelancers, and it was our job to, make them work. They didn't understand production. And they would sometimes come up with these elaborate stunts, which probably would be even too expensive for Fast and Furious 12 or whatever. And we had to go, you got to kind of tone this down. And of course, God love Jack Gill. We would have conferences with him about what kit can and can't do. Jack, though, always, the more dangerous it was, more exciting he was, and the more like it's never been done before, he would figure out how he might be able to do it. But kit itself, we were very lucky in that the car. Now, there's, as you know, many different cars for different things. The turbo boost car, for example, was you'd have the shell of it, and the frame was built so you can put the shell on it. And then the idea was it had to be very, very light, because how those were done is and you never saw this, but there was a ramp that went up like this, and then kit would go, and they would, in those days there was no CGI or anything, so you'd have to put a truck or bushes or something so you didn't see the ramp. And then he would go up the ramp at incredible speed and then fly in there. And then usually they would cut it so you'd see Michael in the car, and then he'd kind of go back, and then you'd see already in the air, is how they would do those things. And it had a VW engine in it, VW bug engine, and very little else, so that it was very light. And of course, the problem, which was, and then what he did, which was amazing, he brought out weights and sandbags and other things to balance it, but because, you couldn't get a huge, you needed a lot of thrust and a lot of speed. And these engines many times did not really have the kind of speed. And that was always a little disconcerting. And the other thing that was very funny was, if you noticed, many times he would turbo boost, and we like to be in like residential areas, and you'd and we, on a lot of the stuff we did then, you see in big movies and so forth, you'll see like 180 people out there and millions of different lights and cranes and everything, and everyone's millions of trailers and whatever. So you knew it was a film. But when we would do a lot of those stunts, some were even done we call second unit, or we tried to keep a low profile. And so the funny part of that was that the reactions of people were just like the extras. We always would have extras go, oh, well. And there were people like looking out their window, and they wouldn't see the ramp. And they didn't realize we were filming, because there wasn't a lot of commotion or equipment out there. And, I used to love, you'd see them looking out their picture windows and stuff. And it's like, what? And suddenly not only is there a car turbo boosting flying in the air, but it's kit, which is something. But we always had extra cars. As a matter of fact, the semi, which was used, which is an incredibly dangerous stunt that Jack did. Now, of course, again, I keep saying CGI, was when he was called into the, night industry semi, which is where everything was set up with April, whoever was in there, and he would actually drive. They would bring down two ramps which always made, well, first I'll say two ramps, and he would at full speed drive up the ramps, and then, which the second thing, of course, would be on a set, but we would drive it in. And it was very funny because people would always say, why don't you just stop the semi? You're not chasing anyone. You're not in any time, and just let them drive up it. And, in fact, when I first started as, and Jack said, because it's not as sexy. He's right. It does, and no one ever mentioned it. It makes no sense whatsoever. That why does he have to go up while it's still driving? And it's always on slightly deserted country roads, because that's where we do it. But anyway, it's something that for your fans, which is funny, is what no one has ever asked that question, except me. I'm sure they have. One thing about it's not as much the car itself, which did get damage on a few. One of the ones which you can see in the clip, where there are times, you always get scared because there have been times where there are miscommunications and something's supposed to be built a certain way and it isn't, and get into terrible problems. As a matter of fact, on my Western wild side, for the first and only time I actually had to fire a crew member, which I hated. He was a prop man. And there was a scene, it was a Western, as I said, and there's a scene where the big burly guy played by a famous wrestler named Terry Funk. And they're sitting around a table eating in the West, all he and it's like the Magnificent Seven and the other Wild Side crew. And they're finding out there's a kind of a street urchin kid who lives in the town they all take care of, and he's been kidnapped. And they're eating there, and it's sort of a New Orleans type place where they would eat. And so what I wrote was a big hot sauce bottle with a big neck on it, and he loves, pouring, all the sauce on it. And the character is supposed to say, if I ever find that SOB who got that kid, I'm going to wring his neck. And what he does is he takes it, and what's written is he breaks it, and all of the hot sauce goes over, everyone's food. Now, I only bring this is because, again, it's sort of like what happened with Kit in Nightmares, where there's a miscommunication, because in that, you're supposed to have a breakaway glass, it'll snap, and which makes sense, you don't put Tabasco or hot sauce in there, you put red liquid water. And this idiot prop man got an actual made, an antique looking thing, but it was real glass, and he puts Tabasco sauce in it. So first, when he breaks it, he gets a huge cut on his hand. It went into his eyes. We had to rush him to the emergency hospital. And the same thing, the reason I mentioned that is in the Nightmares episode, there's a scene where Kit goes crashing through a warehouse. And we have one of those doors go down, and in production meetings and everything, and Jack said, make it out. You don't want to make it too flimsy looking, even though you're going to add sound effects and everything, because it's going to look like what it is. It's going to look like balls. But there's ways, without going into details, there's ways to make it safe, and also to score it, and also, so that it doesn't look like you're crashing through styrofoam or something. And I don't know exactly what the door was, but it was I think actually an industrial door or close to it. And if you look at that, you'll see that Kit got pretty bashed up. And there were scenes after that, and we were going to use, that was the hero car, because it was supposed to not get damaged. It wasn't a big stunt like that. And after that, a lot of scenes had to be rewritten and so forth, or we'd have to shoot just by the passenger or the driver door in a different direction, because the nose was all crumpled and so forth. But that was the only thing. But Jack himself, being a stuntman, would get injured sometimes, and some of those were just being a stuntman. And one of them, which you can see, is a Knight in Shining Armor. There's a scene in which he's chasing Daphne Ashbrook, who is the girl that he's taken to protect, and she's what we're doing is taming of the shrew, basically, was the idea. And so she gets away from him, she escapes, she tricks him, and she gets on a horse, believe it or not, if you remember. I don't remember how I got her on a horse, but I'm a horse person. I'm a cowboy, and I have horse, so I always like to have horses. And she's riding it down, that was in Griffith Park, down, like, not on the road, but on this, just on the side of the road, on the side of the hill, the foot of the hill. And Kit goes by, and Michael, but it's Jack, gets up from the sunroof. And the thing is driving, and he stands up from the sunroof and he grabs her. And I think he either stops the horse. What I wanted to do is to have him grab her off the horse. But I believe the way we did it for safety, because I think he stops the horse. But there was a mistake that happens sometimes. They were in such a hurry. Usually they do 6 or 7 trial runs to make sure, because we're not on a road, that there's no, berms or something that could be a problem. And they went and shot it quickly. Um, and watch that scene, because as Kit is chasing the horse, he hits some kind of, little bit of a hill, and you see in his head hits the top of the.
I remember he really takes a steep dive. Yeah.
Right. And
Now let's watch that scene where Jack Gill takes a tumble.
and we and we were worried, and I don't remember, he was pretty damaged, but I mean, he, being Jack, who's like, a tank, he just kept going and all that. And it's funny because I thought we should, when he finally gets her off, and we hadn't shot the next portion yet. I wrote right there on this, on the outdoor location, where Michael, who's always angry, at one point he actually flips her over his shoulder, if you remember, and drags her back in, and again, taming of the shrew. I wrote a thing about him saying, "You almost got me killed. You think that's gonna go crashing?" And actually maybe have like some red on his, and use it. And I don't remember who or why, and they just said, "No, we don't want to make a big point because we don't want to think Michael." I said, "Well, you don't want to make a point that Michael hit his head really hard, but you don't want to do the scene over and everyone's going to see him hitting his head." So that was the first one. And the other one with him, first of all, we used in Nightmares, Kit goes, as we showed in one of the other things we talked about, there's a dam, and he hits the side of the dam and breaks the where the cylinder where the girl is in with the water, and there's a whole funny story about that. And a lot of that was Kit itself, and a Kit actually turbo boost, and then brilliantly, a lot of that also was models, miniatures, and they actually did an amazing thing if you watch it carefully, because they couldn't build a miniature of the dam; it would be cost prohibitive. So they actually brought the miniature to the dam, and by using special lenses, wide angle lenses, you wouldn't be able to see the perspective that it's a smaller Kit that's actually hitting the real dam, which was really neat. But in the opening of that, if you remember, the whole point is that Michael has amnesia. And how that happens is the bad guy throws a concussion bomb, like a grenade, from above the dam, and it hits and it explodes, and he goes catapulting in the air. And what I had written, so his head would get hit, was that he slams against the side of the wall and goes down. And then I realized, when I went onto the set, and which you do that, there's a ramp that says a CO2, and it pulls you up and makes you do. So in movies, when you see like bombs going and people flying, they use these ramps. And he was using one of these things, and Jack wanted to make it look better, because I just said, well, just have him fly, and then what we'll do is we'll get actually David Hasselhoff, which they can do, and see him fall, and hit his head. Because I said, I don't want you going flying into the air and hitting the wall. Well, of course, Jack, being Jack, said, no, it looks so much better if he slams into the wall. So he rearranged the catapult, the ramp, and pushed him. And if you notice in that, and that's Jack, he gets flying in the air, hits that wall hard, and then falls. And I'm there. Now, this is my first day, that, as I mentioned before, I came on the show in the second season, and that was my first show, first one we were doing, and first one that I wrote and producing. And I'm on the set on the first day, and there's Jack, and I had used Jack in stunt stuff before and after, so I knew him really well. And he hits that, and he falls, and his wind got knocked out. And when you're a stunt man and something like that happens, because I've done so many stunt things, many times what they'll do is they'll become motionless and they'll assess themselves. Okay, do I have anything broken? And you don't just jump up, because if there's something broken or there, it's better to just lie there. And so they'll assess themselves for like a minute or less, or what feels like a minute. And the reason I say that was Jack hits the thing, falls, and is just lying there. And I suddenly, think I've killed Jack Hill on my first day. Oh my God, I killed Jack Hill. So, and I don't know if because I think he saw me kind of running over, and I don't know if he did it purposely, but, he lied there a little longer, and then I went up to him, he looked up and smiled and said, that look good? So, so those are when it comes to those kinds of things, are really important. The other thing.
Now let's take a quick look at the scene where Jack Gill is almost killed.
The other thing which could have just really did kind of mess up the car a little bit. That was also on Nightmares, and it's one of my favorite stories. And again, because it's another one that if you watch this, you'll see everything I say. You'll see all of this take place in the episode, and now you'll know what really was happening. David, God bless him, as I've always said, and I mean this in a very positive way, I said, think of David as the nicest 8-year-old, and I mean that in the sense, I mean, he was mature, he was bright, he was responsible, he was professional, but he had kind of an 8-year-old's joy about him, and innocence and loyalty, and just a good guy. And but what 8-year-olds also love to do is play practical jokes. And actually, on movie sets, practical joking, if you're with people you like, is a very common thing. And I won't go into details of it, but I felt good because when I did other shows, especially if I was directing, and the crew played practical jokes on me, which they did a lot. You have to realize they're doing it out of sort of because they know you can take it and they like you. Yeah. It's not a mean thing, but they do it. And David loved practical jokes. Well, the one that he wouldn't have killed him, he thought it was going to kill him, that backfired, is in Nightmares. As you know, he has to reacquaint himself with Kit. He still thinks he's Michael Long, the police officer. And what's this Kit? It's following around and talking to him and everything. And at one point, he finally, he's walking down the street and it just keeps following and following and following. And he tries to get away from him. And he goes off the street and he gets into an alley. And he's running down the alley. And Kit follows him. And at one point he runs and there's, those construction fence things that's up there with the lights blinking because they're doing some work. And, the character of Michael kind of runs in between them. But Kit, seeing this, and if you remember, he's going to turbo boost over them and, get over to Michael, who's now hit a dead end. Well, Michael, I'll do that all the time here. David had, because the way it's written, I wrote it, it sounds like it's very dangerous and it's a very narrow alley. And Kit, and he looks as he turbo boosts, and when he comes down, he could smash one side or the other. And he comes almost right to David, but he's able to, get the car, and the car almost crashes. And and most of that is for the damn network. And you're writing it, you're making it sound better. It's still going to look great. So David did this. Jack Gill's wife, one of the absolutely most wonderful and talented people, as she's an actress and just an incredible human being. He's a very lucky man, named Morgan Brittany. And you've seen her in tons and tons of things. And uh, David, and this is, we didn't have cell phones back then. So what did was we had studio phones in the sound stages. As a matter of fact, one of my very first jobs as a kid was I would stand by the studio phone when people rang, like from the office, whatever. I actually would pick it up and say stage 12, and then say, can you get so and so for me? And then I would go to them, and that's what you had to do in those days. So David was going actually right near there. He was doing this all day. He was going to payphones because there were, which is funny when you think about it, calling the stage. I think I'm not sure, it may have been 20th Century Fox, but anyway, or it could have been Universal, which was only 3 blocks away. Calling the stage and getting Brittany on the phone and just saying, listen, Brittany, I just think you should know, Jack is doing this crazy, crazy stunt. It's like nothing we've ever done. And I'm quite worried about him. And I'm really worried about him doing this. And I know he's the best. But this is nuts. And she said, well, what do you mean? And she's been, seen him do everything. And she's the wife of a stuntman. So it shouldn't get to him. But David kept pushing it and pushing it. Well, suddenly, right before they were about to actually do the sequence with it, and we're using again a turbo boost, so that it was a whole second situation. We look around, and Morgan is on the set, and I.
Welcome back. It is TV magic, Tom, isn't it? Suddenly you were in one place and now you're in the next.
Oh yes, well, and hopefully I look okay. Yes, it's a rare moment in the world. It happens actually on Knight Rider, because we're talking about Knight Rider. But in Knight Rider, it was very funny because, as you know, LA does not have a lot of rain, and Knight Rider is very much an outdoor show. And in those days, you paid a I can't even say the word, a weatherman, but a high level weather person who would be able to give you as accurate, but they would go with all the Doppler time bandwidth normalization, to let you know if it's going to rain, because you had to have, what are called cover sets. And of course, when they said there is no problem, it is absolutely not going to rain, you wouldn't have a cover set, it would rain. Anyway, we just got a little bit of a drizzle. I didn't want all my stuff to explode or short circuit, so we're back. Hopefully it's looking okay in my office.
It's
So
it's fine, Tom.
yes.
So we were just talking about this very special scene with David having
Oh yeah, so you got up to the point where I had to leave to not get wet
wet,
like the
exactly, yeah.
wicked witch. I'm melting. So okay, well I because I know where I left off before the rains started. Um, and what I was telling you is that after all of this, David talking to Morgan and getting her concerned. Next thing we knew, because I think we actually had broke for lunch and then set up for the big shot. There's a lot of stuff before with David looking around, and there's Kit following, and then the final thing is that Kit will not. Michael Knight or David thinks he has thwarted him because he goes behind this barrier, construction barrier, but of course, Kit turbo boosts over it, and that's what David said was going to be very dangerous because of this, what we had, and that it was supposed to be dangerous. That David looks at this car and says, "Oh, that's the end of this car," And anyway, And as I was saying, Jack is no dummy, and he figured everything out very quickly. And you could just say, he says, "Okay, we're ready." And David, and in the scene that you will see, the turbo boost, if I remember, is separate. But then the car lands and comes right at David at this place where there is a dead end. And Jack, who of course, can manipulate anything and everything and is in complete control. However, I think he purposely landed in a certain way so the car was rocking or on two wheels, but it went right towards David. And the look, as you will see, and it was that same scene I told you with the actress in the dam sequence. And not that David's not a bad actor, but the look of absolute horror on his face, because he thought, and Jack, by the way, made like look at him before he went in, like, how can you do this? And you'll see his car comes barreling right towards David, who has no place to go because behind him is a wall. And and the car is like, looks like, oh, the other thing is, it looks like the car's out of control. So it looks like, Jack is not in control of it. And so, and as you'll see, within just inches of David, it stops, which was perfect. So that was just a wonderful backstory. And David never did that anymore. He never, especially with Morgan and all. And if I remember correctly, when it all kind of came around and what was going on, I do think they all got a big laugh, and I think Morgan was laughing at anything. And I think she made it completely, because so long ago, but I think she even said something like, "Oh, it was good to get me out of, out in the open," or something, that she had to leave and it wasn't a big deal. But anyway, so it's a wonderful scene to see because of that. You'll see what was in there. One thing that happened.
Now let's watch this scene with the turbo boost, one of my all-time favorite scenes in Knight Rider.
One thing that happened on that, and I think right after that, the big thing about it, I think David actually then goes into the car. I think that was why I wrote that. One thing that happened during that scene, when Kit and we came out of the alleyway back onto the street, and this happened, I heard it from others, but I saw it happen several times when I was on location, where people came rushing up to David, and actually talked to Kit and said, "I need your help," and it's a medical thing, or there's something in the house that, they're worried about. And they thought that David could come rushing over with Kit and take care of the problem. A lot of it had to do with car trouble, or other things. Or they were in an accident, which I always thought was just delightful. And of course, we had paramedics. We had sometimes we would even we by law we had to actually have firemen if there was going to be any open flame at all. And there was always a nurse always on the set, so it was taken care of. But I always thought it was wonderful that they run up to them and and actually lean and go, "Kit, listen, I need your help," and then whatever. And of course, there was no answering. William Daniels was off doing something else at the time. One of the shows that I think it was one of the, before I actually became a producer on the show, and this just has kind of a funny, kind of sweet kind of thing to it, and kind of a funny backup end story to it. As I think I said in one of my other discussions, that I was working on a couple of their series, and Bob Senator had just taken over in the beginning of Knight Rider, and of course, Glenn Larson did absolutely 100% create that show. And if I'm not mistaken, he was somewhat involved, which was kind of unusual, because in a lot of his shows, a lot of them, he left it to the other people, went on to do something else. But I think he was working a little bit with Senator, trying to find a balance and finding how it would work. And of course, a lot of it wasn't their fault. Again, you have the network coming in, always, you know, pouring salt into the punch bowl. But anyway, so I was, as I said, Bob Sennett was writing these massive memos to me because the studio said, oh, you know, Tom's really good at this. Why don't you see what he can do? He can't get on your show right now. He's doing something else. And we went back and forth. And I knew Bob Senator. I got, which was fun, got to work on some of Jack Webb's shows, and Senator was sort of his right-hand man for years and years and years. And of course, Jack Webb, which is a whole nother thing to get into, which I won't, was one of these people, and I was just blessed to be involved with so many of these characters, a one of a kind. You know, I mean, he was this amazing person. Anyway, when I was working with Senator and with Jack Webb, Senator was really proud. He was talking about one of his friends was Woody Allen. And at that time, Woody was, I think he had done a couple of his first films, but then at the time when he was memoing me back and forth, and as a matter of fact, I actually got, which rarely happened, it's like what happens now. Nobody calls anyone anymore. Everything is texts. Yeah. It's not even email anymore. It's all text now, right? How dare someone actually call you? But in those days, you know, for him, because everything with him was memos, to actually get him on the phone. And he got me on the phone to talk about something, and he really needed a story. He wanted something kind of fun and maybe a little bit humorous, but still would have some, you know, danger to it. And that was sort of my specialty. You know, there was always a little bit of silliness or fun in the shows that I did, unless it was very serious. And so he said, yeah, on the phone, he said, listen, I really need something today. I got to go to the network. We got to get this done so we can get forward, because everything was being postponed on that first season. And I jokingly said to him, oh, well, it's easy. I have an idea for you. You know Woody. Oh, and he also said he wanted, they're talking about what we call stunt casting, which is where you bring in someone famous or someone, and we have cast breakage, which I mentioned, where they get paid a lot more, but it beefs up your rating, so it's worth it. And then the network will pay the cast breakage. So I said, well, I got the perfect one. I got a funny idea, which just kind of came to my head. I said, get Joe Allen. He'll do a guest spot on Knight Rider. And Bob was a great guy, but he wasn't, you know how, you know, some people who aren't good at joking because they're not that funny, so they take everything you say seriously. Yeah. So he went, oh, no, I don't think I get Woody. We couldn't afford, no, he wouldn't do it. And I couldn't ask him to do it. And at that time, I think he had already done, I'm not sure time-wise, he may have already done Annie Hall, Manhattan, a couple other things. I mean, he was as hot as can be. Yeah. And I said, you know, Bob, I'm joking. I said, but before I did that, I pitched the idea before, you know, while he still thought I was going to get Woody Allen. And the idea was that Michael Knight would have to take this crazy, absolutely neurotic, you know, self-centered, cowardly Woody Allen character who is an accountant, had been accountant for the mafia. And he has to take him across country to do testimony to the grand jury. You know, and then of course he has to deal with, you know, this neurotic character who won't eat these things and won't go there and gets into big arguments with Kit and whether. But on the other hand, in his quirkiness, he actually kind of saves the day sometimes, and they become buddies, you know. And of course, you then have the mafia guys after them to try to kill him. So you had all that stuff going on, and I think I came up with the title Final Verdict. I could be wrong, which was the episode. Yeah. And as those people now have caught on, well, of course, he said, well, we can't get Woody Allen, but I love the idea. And if I'm not mistaken, and nothing against the actor who played it, I think he was a relatively unknown, and I don't think he ever really went anywhere. So it was, what I'm saying, it was the opposite of, you know, giving Woody Allen $500,000 to do it. But I think the guy did well. And if I'm not mistaken, but I just gave him that. And I did get a story credit on it, but I didn't write the script. And I think that when everything got through, it had more to do with a girl who's she's up for murder or something. And he is a witness. And instead of having to go cross country, he only has to go up the coast for a while. Yeah. But the fun part about that, two fun things came from this. I noticed that in the little blurbs for for the show, they always say a Woody Allen type,
Yeah.
which I think was really kind of funny
Exactly,
because I guess they really did that. And the other thing I'll say quickly about that is it's a great director who sadly made a movie that, and it was not, which was terrible. He made one bad movie after making a huge hits, and weirdly enough, suddenly disappeared. They wouldn't let him work anymore. That's Marty Brest, amazingly talented. He gave us Going in Style, Beverly Hills Cop, Scent of a Woman, and Midnight Run, on and on. Oh, and the one with Brad Pitt, which was based on a thing called Death Takes a Holiday. Meet Joe Black or Joe something.
yeah. Meet Joe Black. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant director. And anyway, he started out in the business just very quickly. He made, which I consider the best student film ever made ever for the American when he was at the American Film Institute. And to make a long story short, again, the guy who started it was called Hot Tomorrows, and the guy who started it was a good friend of mine, whose brother was Michael Lerner was his brother, and who got an Academy Award nomination for Barton Fink. And sadly, I just mentioned because as like prior to here, he sadly just died. The brother did. But Kenny Lerner was his brother, and he was a good friend of mine, and he was in this. And Kenny said, "You really should see this movie," you know. And so I screened it at Universal, and it just blew me away. I said, "You got it. This got to be released." I think it was made for like 50,000 or something. It was a student film. Anyway, in fact, the guys who do the great Ogo Bogo band, you know, the one who does all of, you know, like Edward Scissorhands and all that, the director of those movies, he's the guy who, he also wrote the music for The Simpsons. He one of his first things. Anyway, and so I brought in some great executives, including my dear executive friend, Peter Safir, the one who let me know years later that they all called my house, knowing that I was living at home and my mother was saying, "Tom Green's office." But he acquired independent movies for Universal, and I screened it again for him, and he said, this is a deal. You know, I had nothing to do with it. I said, deal. But American Institute, which I won't go into, in those days anyway, they were insane. They said, "How dare a student film of ours become commercialized and actually be done by a studio?" And you kind of say, isn't that kind of what these directors are going to do?
What it's all about.
But the only reason I bring all that up was that I knew Marty, and he would invite me sometimes to some of his movies. I didn't get to talk to him too much, but I guess I was on the list. And so I got to go in to see this movie called Midnight Run. I knew nothing about it except it had two brilliant actors in it, Robert De Niro and Charles Grodin, for God's sake, and Yaphet Kotto. And I'm watching this, and it is, and it was so funny as I'm watching it, it is exactly the story that I pitched to Bob Senator, including a lot of the scenes in it. Now, what's in our business, you know, we're always thinking about people, they taking my ideas and stealing it. There's absolutely no way in the world that anyone knew about my story. It was not stolen. It was 100% coincidence because there are only so many stories. Yeah. As a matter of fact, in my story, because I was saying we got to expand and go out, and every year in January, I go to the Grand Canyon. I've been going there since I was 16 years old. And I stay in this wonderful town called Williams, which is at the foothill. And then I drive every day up to the canyon and back. And I had one of the places I'm going to have them go in this Knight Rider episode is in Williams. And I had this thing with, there's the scene in a bar, and there's another thing, because I knew Williams even back then really well. And that there is a scene where they actually go in Midnight Run, and they're in Williams, and they go to a bar, and I think they go to a 7-Eleven, and they're coming out with all this food, and I think, yeah, if I go, someone, he uses, this is what I did, in my accountant, uses a little flim-flam in order to get more money, and then they use the money, and they go to like a 7-Eleven and get all this food, and then the guy comes out, and they run. I had that exact same thing in mind. So anyway, for the people out there who want to be writers and all, the absolute stealing of stuff is very rare, but it could be that much. It just drives you nuts, you know, and so forth. But that was kind of fun. Now, we talk about, you know, how we get our ideas or what shows we want to do, and how sometimes an episode can drive you crazy, and other times it's really easy. There were two of them that drove me crazy for two different reasons. The first one is, which we've mentioned before about Jack's stunt. It's called Knight in Shining Armor.
Yeah.
And and again, it was sort of a taming of the shrew idea. And I actually wrote that with my story editor, who I've mentioned, Janice Hindler, who was a brilliant writer, incredibly fast, but fast is fast, but fast and good. And so that was really a fun thing for both of us. But anyway, we both had something. She was very much a very strong-willed person. You didn't mess with Janice. And actually, her husband was a very well-known producer and a wonderful man who did a lot of Glenn Larson shows. And he was a weightlifter. He was literally like a Schwarzenegger. I mean, he was in that kind of building and had his own gym in his house. And Janice would work with him. So Janice was like that too. But she also was, and she wrote, I think, a lot of rom-coms after that. She also was a romantic at heart. The reason I mention all that is both of us were getting really angry at something, and that is, why is it that everyone is always after, whatever they're after and everything they want has to do with money or oil or gold or jewels or this? Wouldn't it be great if we could do a show where what they're after turns out to be the gift of beauty? The gift of showing love for somebody, just for that. No money, no nothing. And that's where we came up with the idea of this Indiana Jones character who had a daughter he hardly ever saw and put her in these very fancy places, but he made all this money, finding all of this jewels, finding all this stuff. And he wants to send to her this locket, if you remember. And in the locket is like a map. And everyone thinks it's because it's for her, his daughter. It's the map to his mother lode, either the most expensive thing or where he keeps all of his treasures or something. And so, of course, people are after her, if you remember. And Michael Knight has to take her literally over his shoulder into Kit and get her away and protect her until they find out what this is. And it was really a beautiful, and in this one, they cast this lovely actress who was like Cinderella. She was this blonde blood, like named Daphne Lee Ashbrook, who did lots of things, and she did a terrific job too. We wrote a lot of scenes, and what happens, if you remember, is the Indiana Jones character is murdered because they kill him in the beginning because they think they're going to find the locket. Now they're after her, and the whole point of it, if you remember, was the network went ape crap over this. Absolutely couldn't stand it. Why? Because if you remember, when they finally go to the cave and they finally find out what it is, and there's all these beautiful geodes and sparkling things, and she realizes that what he wanted her to see was that on the outside, and there might have been something even written, he writes to her, but on the outside is this, this nothing mountain, ugly thing, but in the inside of us, in our heart, in our soul, is where our beauty lies. And this is how I feel about you. I've always loved you, and I want to give you this gift. And it was a beautiful story, and we loved it. David absolutely loved it. It was like his favorite show and all that. Well, the network, as I said, went crazy, and they kept saying, okay, well, they have the geo, but then maybe he trips over and then there's all these bars of gold, or maybe Kit's car wheels spin and suddenly this oil comes up and you find out that it's by he thinks he's sitting down on a rock and he looks down and it's a pirate's chest and he opens up and it's filled with jewels and we said no, that's not what it is, and we fought and they actually took out. We had some beautiful scenes where she talks, and there's some of them remain, but she talks kind of wistfully about her father, and we wrote it very in almost early romanticism. I think at one point she says, "I always love the smell of winter. It has the smell of colors," or something. Very, very floral, almost overwritten, because we want it to be almost like a fairy tale, which ends with her realizing that her dad loved her, and this is what we want. Well, they kept cutting those scenes, and then at the end, we were looking at a rough cut before it gets put into what we call the chain, and so it gets into the negative and looking really good. And suddenly we see that at the end, when the music goes up and we see the geo and everything, if you remember,
Yeah.
and come on, kid, and they walk out, suddenly there's an insert, which we never shot, which is supposedly David's feet and his boot hits something like a rock or something, and it flips over, and there's all these jewels or gold underneath it, you know.
Just an insert shot that you weren't
Yeah.
involved with.
And I found that the network had Universe, had them, without any of our knowledge, shoot, which is very inexpensive to do, shoot this insert. Or I think actually they went, there are studios where we'll do inserts. And I think it wasn't done at Universal. I think it wasn't. Well, thank God we saw that before. And we went crazy. But David called the head of the network at the time. I think it was Ann Daniels, who was actually a very nice woman, and surprisingly, this wasn't her doing this. I know that because she was kind of a romantic herself, and she liked it too. But anyway, and he went ape. And David wasn't like that. David did not, get angry. He did not say, "I want this." He was, an incredible professional. He got what he wanted, but I never saw him lose his temper. However, he also didn't take crap from anybody. He would just calmly say no. And when you're that tall and whatever, you can kind of get away with it. And and they just said no. He said, "I'll tell you what, if I see that that's in the final, the cut when we see it," he said, we actually said, I think something like, "Our producer has a script called The Death of Michael Knight, and I'm going to say that's our next show," which I've discussed before. And to him, he just said, "You can't do that. You can't do that." And if you look at it, you'll see it. I hope. I don't know if they put it back.
It didn't make the final cut.
It didn't make the final cut.
I've never
No,
seen
they
it,
took
at
it
least.
out. Yeah, no. It ends with that concept that it's beauty and all of that. Now, the network just said, "Oh, lost leader. This is going to be laughed up." Did you know? Because again, this is years before computers and emails and things like that. We got more mail, both at the network and the studio, from people writing letters to say that that episode meant so much to me. Someone said, "I just lost my father, and it's spoken to my heart," or my dog, so-and-so lost, their job and worrying about how they're going to live, but then saw that and realized, wait a minute, I have a beautiful family and a wife and daughter. Those kind of letters, on and on and on. And, it was wonderful. And I remember David we didn't do it because there were easily 100 that we got, which is very unusual. Because the other thing you have to know, it's something that then, not as much, I don't know with emails now, but in those days, if a studio or a sponsor or a network got a letter, they would times it by 100. Because it meant that if this one person actually wrote the letter, there's 99 other people who were thinking it and wanted to write it. It's an interesting concept. What David wanted to do is he wanted to have all those letters put in a leather-bound book, and given to that executive, which unfortunately we never did. But that's, I love that, that happened. And the other thing about Knight in Shining Armor, and speaking about Jack Gyllenhaal's stunts, is so many what writers, virtually anything you write is autobiographical. You're always pulling things from your past experiences, fantasies, on some shows, when I was in high school, I was a trumpet player in the orchestra and the band, but I was also in the marching band, which is probably the geekiest thing you can do. I was doing other stuff that was more macho, and you have to go to the football games, and I was madly in love with Colleen Lightfoot. Now, is that the name for the varsity head of the varsity cheerleaders? Her name was actually Colleen Lightfoot.
Okay.
And so I used to put her name in all my shows, in many shows, hoping that one day, thinking that now she's living in a trailer with, because she was, of course, involved, I think, with, the captain of the football team. And then probably married him. This is in my mind. And now they're living in a trailer park, and he sits at home drinking, and she's watching the show, and she goes, "Oh my God, that's my name," because a name like that, who wrote this? And then I would get a call. Now, the stupidity of that is the fact that I never had the nerve of ever going up to her or talking to her when I was in the stands playing it. She had no idea who I was or who the anyway. But the point is, we all used things, experiences, names, people. And one of the ones that I used was I lived very near train tracks
Yeah.
where I grew up, and I used to love to go out there and look at the trains and stuff. And very careful, of course. We only thing we did do, which I don't know if you know about this out there, but we would take dimes or pennies and put them on the rail before the train came by to squash them. I don't know, that was a big thing. But when the trains would go by and there was a boxcar, and I would go out my bike. I would ride out there, and if the boxcar was open on both sides, my fantasy was that I would race like crazy. And this is long before even knowing about turbo boosting, and somehow be able to go right through one side of the boxcar and onto the other. And this was always a big fantasy of mine. And so when I was doing Night of Shining Armor, I wanted on the location scouting, we wanted this to be a really beautiful looking show. And if you notice when your people look at that episode again, everywhere they went, it looked really good and lush and pretty. Whereas most of the stuff was done on Lancashire Boulevard, which is very, industrial, which is right by Universal, because you're just about a mile away from the studio. And, so we did that in this. And one of the places we use is called Riverside Drive, which is really beautiful near Griffith Park, which is very famous out here. In fact, that's where, I guess, in La La Land and also in Rocketeer and in James Dean, Rebel Without a Cause, they have the observatory there, and you've seen it. And anyway, and I grew up all through this area, and there are train tracks and we're going, and sometimes you have to, the gate comes down and you have to stop, and these long freight trains go by on Riverside Drive. Well, we had planned, when I talked to Jack, because at one point he takes her from her very expensive, exclusive private school and literally, Taming of the Shrew style, literally throws her over his shoulder, if you remember, and throws her into the car because she's this real bitch kind of thing, but underneath it's because she's angry and doesn't feel loved and whatever. So I said to Jack, I said, what I want to do there is all the guys that would be in this private school would be also very, very rich. I said, so it would be great. It's always hard to find reasons why, Kit is being chased, because Kit can go so fast. Why does he worry about anyone catching up with him? But in this one, I said, we'll have, if you look at the cars, I think there's a Ferrari, there is a, Maserati, there's like 4 very expensive cars. These rich kids get into their, $100,000 cars and chase after him, but they can go fast. And at one point he's looking, he says, they're catching up. And then the train goes. Then I said, how about this, Jack? We have one of those trains go by. And, what are we going to do? And she says, no problem here. And he turbo boosts through, and there's a boxcar with both gates open. He turbo boosts through it. Jack loved it. He thought that was the greatest. And we were working on. Other people were very worried. It's a very dangerous thing to do. And it has to be timed perfectly. And there are certain aspects of it that you don't have control over. I was really amazed, because what they said was, because they were doing a lot with models in that season, and the company that did the models said, well, we actually have a train, and we can do that. We can shoot Kit through it, and I said, yeah, it's going to look like a Tinker toy. It's going to look like some cheap little Sheriff John local TV show or whatever those were, the Zotbots, whatever, these real cheap Power Rangers, that kind of thing. And or there was actually a wonderful show of marionettes who were like space marionettes. I don't know if you remember. It was a very funny show. The guys who did South Park actually did a feature based on these marionettes. But anyway, I was really concerned, and I have to say that when I saw it, I didn't realize that they had done it already. We were looking at it in dailies, and someone turned to Jack and said, wow, Jack, that was really amazing. And I almost thought, did Jack really do it? That's how good it was. I was really impressed with it. One thing you'll notice in that, though, if I'm not mistaken, I hope it's in there. It's been so long. David loved to mess, of course, with people. And in the scene, he's driving down with Daphne, and he looks behind him, and we're shooting in the car, and he says, well, we're gonna have to get away out of here. Blah blah blah. He says, we're gonna turbo boost, and they did a rehearsal, and Daphne looked at him and said, "You're not." Oh, and we had a train so that it'll match. They actually had a train go by, but his POV was the model, but we had the train go by, and so the train was there and it's going by, and Daphne goes, "You're not really turbo boosting this car into the going train." He said, "Yes, of course. This is Knight Rider. I'm Michael Knight. Of course we are. Come on, let's do it." So what you do in those scenes is you go all the way up to the point, you go like this, and then they go, and like that, and then you hear the sound, and then you cut, right?
Yeah.
We actually went all the way up to the point of going forward, pushing the button, and going, look at that. And she goes, she actually freaks out. And if I'm not mistaken, if you remember, that's what you see. But when you see her do that, and the fear and horror on her face was, he was going right towards a real train. And, so those are just really great things to do. Another one in which David stood his ground. He did this, always for really good things. And David, he said to me once, it's a wonderful line. He said, if when you're an actor and you're doing a show, because he did like soaps and other things before, so he says, what you have to learn is not to be a diva. He said, but choose your battles carefully.
Yeah.
If I'm going to battle, it's going to be something I really, because he said some of these, prima donnas and so forth, and these, especially in so, everything was a battle.
Yeah.
I don't like the lunch. I don't like the lunch meat, or I don't like, this coffee doesn't have real cream, or blah blah.
Yeah.
And they're constant, and that, so you got deaf ears. So so David would do that, and where that also came in was in that show called Race for Life.
Yeah.
And then of course they're racing to get. This girl is dying, and they have to. I know it was an organ, or I've forgotten that one. I think that was written, may have been also because in the shows Janice and I would write them, or we'd write our own, or we'd be kind of a team, and Rob Gilmer and Robert Foster would be a team, or we'd all work together. So that wasn't one that I wrote, but the sad thing with that was it did have to do with saving a kid's life, if I'm not mistaken. Racing for life, literally. And the actor who played the father in that, who I think goes with David, his own son died during the production of that show. It was devastating. And they were willing to recast, they're willing to, what they saw suspend and extend, which means they'll actually suspend the show. They do that if you have an actor who's injured badly. And then put it aside and start another show and then come back to do it. And he said, no, he said, I need this, I need to be coming here and doing this. There's nothing more I can do. He'd be going to the hospital every day. So at the end, what David and we put on the end of the show, which we never did before, we dedicated the show to his son. And then under it, we had the name of the charity it was a rare disease of the disease. And it didn't say, it obviously meant that, maybe you want to give something to this. And the network, again, went crazy. And they said, absolutely not. You have to take that off. If you're going to be doing dedications every week, and everyone wants a dedication, get a dedication, and you put in that charity, they're not as one of our sponsors has a different charity. In other words, they want to pay us. And I mean, it was disgusting, absolutely disgusting. And again, David quietly said to them, fine. Well, you can call this, that was Race for Life. And again, the other one is the death of Mike Knight or whatever he said. I'm not coming back. I'll be home, bye. And and the thing about David, which is amazing, is he meant it. When he would do these things, he really was upset, or he really felt it. And when he said, they knew it, and the network knew it. This wasn't he wasn't saying this thing hoping they're going to turn. He would have done that. That's what David was like. And of course, he did it very rarely. And they made a compromise. I wish we had really pushed, but at that point, he really wanted the dedication to the son. They had to take out the charity in the credit. So there's the dedication that's there. But again, this is again, I can only go on and on about David's heart, as I mentioned in other parts about working with kids who are dying of cancer, whatever, and what he does. And again, I'm just going to repeat it. He made it so clear, no publicity. I don't want photographers. I don't want journalists. I don't want this mentioned. I'm going to do all this. I'm doing this, and this is not about that. And he wouldn't allow that to happen. Now, we were talking about
how we ended here for this time. That was the end of part 3 of my fantastic conversation with Tom Greene regarding his memories on Knight Rider. Get ready to join again when we continue our conversation in part 4 of this interview.